Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite fantasy adventure films from the 80s, Willow, starring Warwick Davis and Val Kilmer, directed by Ron Howard, with the story by George Lucas. So before I get into my thoughts on why I think Willow is such a great movie, I did just want to give a spoiler alert. If you've never seen this movie, I would highly recommend watching it first because I will be getting into spoilers. And I am also going to give a brief plot synopsis here. So basically, there's this evil Queen Bavmorda that is trying to take over the entire realm. And there is a prophecy that a child will be born who will destroy her. That child is born. And this is where the story begins, where Willow ends up being tasked with protecting the child at all costs and trying to then destroy Bavmorda. The reason that I believe that Willow is such a great movie, other than it is fun, it is entertaining, and it has a great heart, is that to me, it epitomizes the hero's journey story. Now, there are 12 stages of the hero's journey. I am not going to go through all 12, as this video would probably end up being 2 hours long. So I am just going to go through the stages that I believe are the most pertinent to this movie. The concept of the hero's journey monomyth and the 12 stages of the hero's journey is attributed to Joseph Campbell, who is an American writer, a professor of literature at Sarah Lawrence College, and worked in comparative mythology and comparative religion. He wrote several books, most famous of which was The Hero with 1,000 Faces. Joseph Campbell was very much interested in religion, mythology, folklore, and ritual, and wanted to try to extrapolate commonalities between all of these. And this is where he came up with the monomyth, which refers to the theory that all of these narratives are really variations of a single story. And he wanted to understand what these myths and rituals mean for humankind. The reason that I bring up Joseph Campbell and his work is because George Lucas was heavily influenced by Campbell. We can see Joseph Campbell's influence in several of George Lucas's projects, both movies that he directed himself and movies that he wrote the story for, such as the Star Wars franchise, the Indiana Jones franchise, and of course, Willow. The first stage of the hero's journey is the ordinary world. This is where we see how the hero is and behaves before he begins his adventure. And we know that Willow is a father of 2 children, Mims and Rhiannon, and is married to Kaya. He is a farmer, and we see in the beginning that he is in the process of plowing his fields so he can plant seeds for the next harvest. He also has an aspiration to become a magician. That's really what he wants in life, is to practice magic and to not have to farm. So the second stage in the hero's journey is the call to adventure. So this is the person or event, the catalyst that starts the hero on his journey. So in this case, it's the arrival of the baby, Elora Danan, and he is found by both of his children, Mims and Rhiannon. Rhiannon then runs to Willow and says, "Daddy, Daddy, there's something down by the river." And at first, Willow thinks he's just trying to play a game with him. Well, then Willow follows him down to the river, and they find the baby that we later know is called Elora Danan. Kaya goes down to the river to check on her kids to make sure they were okay and finds the baby. Now we move on to phase 3 of the hero's journey, which is the refusal of the call. We see this pretty much right away. When Willow sees the baby, he realizes that she is not a Nelwyn, which is what the little people of the village are called, he realizes that she is a daikini baby, which daikinis to them are giants. So his immediate instinct is to say that they should push her down the river and pretend like they never saw her. The other instance where we see this is when there's this incident in the village where these death dogs show up and they immediately start to attack this crib. It was an empty crib, but they still attacked the crib, and the village soldiers were able to kill these dogs, and they realized that they were after a baby. Willow runs back home. She's okay, praise God. And they decide to take the baby to the High Council. So they're going to the High Council, and Willow is holding the baby, and he walks in pretty timid. And then he realizes everyone's upset and in an uproar, and everyone wants to know whose fault this is and everything that's going on. So he kind of shies back and starts walking backward, hoping no one will see him so he can sneak out. But then the High Aldwin sees Willow with the baby and calls him to come forward. Next, we have stage 4 of the hero's journey, which is meeting the mentor. Now, basically what this stage is when the potential hero meets the person that will give them the confidence or help push them to go on the adventure. There's an earlier scene in the movie where the High Aldwin is trying to find an apprentice, and there are a group of men that are placed in front of him, Willow being one of them, and there is a challenge presented. He holds up his hand to the challengers and asks which finger has the power to change the world. He walks up to each one. They all pick a different finger. When he finally gets to Willow, Willow hesitates and looks at his own finger, but he doubts himself and chooses the High Aldwin's fingers. He puts all of his fingers down and shakes his head no and says there won't be a new apprentice this year. I bring that up because after Willow is chosen to embark on this adventure, the High Aldwin approaches him and says, I'm just curious what your initial instinct was when I approached you. And Willow says, well, it's kind of silly, but I was going to pick my own finger. And the High Aldwin says, that was the correct answer. Of everyone in the village, you have the most potential to be a great sorcerer. And so that really helps to give Willow the confidence that he needs to embark on this adventure. The High Aldwin also gives him acorns that have the ability to turn to stone anything that you throw at them, giving him a form of protection. So now we come to the next phase of the hero's journey, where we meet allies and enemies. What's interesting in Willow is that some of the characters we meet that we think are initially enemies actually become his allies, such as Mad Mardigan, the Brownies, and Sorsha, the daughter of Queen Bavmorda. Actual allies that we encounter are the High Aldwin, the fairies, Shalindria, the Queen of the Fairies, Rizal, and Eric and his army. Some of the enemies that we encounter is Queen Bavmorda, General Kale, trolls, dragons, and of course, Bavmorda's army. Also in this phase, we do see different challenges arise. Willow is in fact traveling in a group. Along the way, they have to evade Bavmorda's soldiers and the death dogs that are still looking for Alora Dannon. And they finally get to a place called the Crossroads, which I thought was really clever because to me it's both a literal place called the Crossroads as well as the place where they have to make the decision if they're going to continue the journey or go back. At the crossroads, we see hanging cages, and in one of these hanging cages, we see Madmartigan. While Willow and his group are at the crossroads, we see soldiers going by. Now, these aren't Queen Bavmorda's soldiers. These are soldiers from Galadorn. We learn early on in the film that Bavmorda's forces had just defeated Galadorn. So these are soldiers that are on their way to try to push her back. And we meet Eric, who is presumably a general in this army, and he knows Madmartigan. And they have an interesting conversation that reveals a bit about Madmartigan's character. What we learn is that he is a man, he's kind of like a man without a country. He doesn't seem to have a purpose, and he doesn't seem to serve anyone or anything but himself. And as such, Eric will not free him from his cage and thinks that he deserves to be there because he won't pick a side. Burglecut wants to give the baby to Madmartigan. Now, bear in mind, this is someone who is in a cage, probably not for good reasons. Migosh says, he was put in a cage for a reason. Like, why would you give a baby to a man who's in a cage? Well, I think Burglecut just wanted to go home. They don't want to go any further. He doesn't want to go any further. And he convinces the soldiers to go back with him. So now it's just Willow and Migosh. Finally, Madmartigan convinces them to free him, which they do, and they give him the baby. So Willow and Migosh start to head back through the forest when they hear Elora Danan crying, and they look up, and there is a hawk that is being ridden by 2 brownies carrying her. Clearly, Madmartigan was not the best choice to give the baby to either. Now we have the Inmost Cave stage, and this occurs when Willow is taken by the brownies. So in the Inmost Cave, the hero faces the reality of the situation. They're either shown or told what is at stake, and they confront the last of their insecurities and fears about whether they will continue the journey or not. And I believe it is in this scene in particular because this is where we find out that this baby that Willow has been protecting is Elora Danan, who is the baby of the prophecy that will destroy Queen Bavmorda. And he is supposed to take her to Tir Asleen, a kingdom where she will be raised by a king and queen, and she will be taken care of. And then again, this is the final place where Willow says, I'm not the person for the job. And then Shalindria puts into him pretty straight and says, look, you've been chosen by Elora to do this, and if you don't do this, Queen Bavmorda will take over everything and everyone, and that includes your family and your village. And she tells him the choice is yours. Finally makes the decision that he will take on this role and he will do the right thing. So Willow ends up going into a bar, and in this bar, he runs back into Madmartigan. Madmartigan is in a bedroom with a woman and is in the process of being disguised as a woman because the woman that he is with is married, and her husband, who is named Lug, which I thought was really funny, ends up coming home, and obviously if he found her with a man, he would kill him, and maybe even her. So Madmartigan dresses up as a woman, and the husband comes in and then proceeds to hit on this woman who the wife says is her cousin. Sorsha arrives with some of Bavmorda's soldiers and starts searching the establishment to see if there are babies there and if one of them has the mark. Madmartigan had grabbed the baby from Willow to pretend that that baby was his, again, trying to pretend that he's a woman. And so when Sorsha approaches, she asks to see the baby, and Madmartigan won't let her, and she realizes that this supposed woman is unusually strong. And so she rips the shawl that he had put over his face off and says, "You're not a woman." And then the husband, of course, starts getting very angry and starts shouting, "Not a woman," over and over again. To which Madmartigan says, "Everyone, meet Lug." And then he goes to punch Madmartigan and instead punches the soldiers because he ducks out of the way, and they're able to make an escape. Not an easy escape, though. They have to escape on a horse-drawn open wagon, and they're being chased by the soldiers. And poor Willow is trying to keep the baby safe, so he tries to put her in a safe place. The wagon's going a bajillion miles an hour. Madmartigan's trying to fight off all the different soldiers that keep jumping on this open wagon. The brownies are on the wagon and are trying not to get killed by fruit, because there's also fruit on this wagon for some reason. And so Willow's trying to stop the horses and nearly falls out to do so, and then finally does and berates Madmartigan and says, "You can't be riding around like this with a baby." Madmartigan reluctantly helps Willow and the brownies find this fishing village that is across from this island that Rizal has been exiled to. Willow and the brownies find a boat, and they take it to the island while Madmartigan leaves. Once on the island, we find Rizal, but she's not in human form. She is in fact a brush-tailed possum that Queen Bavmorda had turned Rizal into before exiling her. And in this form, she is not at full-fledged strength or power, and she needs Willow to turn her back into a human. Problem is, even though Willow has great potential to be a sorcerer, he is not yet a sorcerer, and has not ever performed magic on this scale, especially not with a wand, right? I mean, he's done some little experiments with the wand earlier in the movie, but certainly they were accidents at best. They end up going back in the boat and going ashore, and what's there for them but Bavmorda's army and Sorsha. And we also see Madmartigan on a horse, and it's obvious that he's the one who told them where he was, presumably so he would be spared. So they are taken to an encampment. The baby is put into a makeshift crib and is in Sorsha's tent. And Madmartigan and Willow are locked in a cage, and Rizal is locked in some kind of a small pet cage. And the brownies are able to sneak around and get some kind of a spear and are able to unlock the cage that Willow and Madmartigan are in. Willow tries to transform Rizal and turns her into a crow. Which actually works out very well because she can, now fly and see what they can't see to help them escape. Well, they're not able to just make a quick escape, of course, because Madmartigan, as usual, was teasing the brownies and pissed them off, and he had this powder thrown on him, which is known as the spell of the broken hearts. Basically, what this will do is it will make you fall in love. They're trying to make their escape, and of course they need to collect Allura Dannon before they can leave. And Madmartigan goes in the tent, sees the baby, then he sees Sorsha, and then this spell powder activates, and then he immediately goes for Sorsha, to everyone else's dismay. He starts spouting poetry, they almost kiss, and then Kale with some of the soldiers walk in and see what's going on, and then Sorsha sees Willow and the brownies trying to get the baby, and then she accuses Madmartigan of being a deceiver. He grabs her, kisses her, and cuts the tent down to cause confusion. After the tent collapses, we see Madmartigan, Willow, and the brownies trying to escape from Kale and the soldiers. Somehow they find a makeshift sled and start sledding down this mountain toward a village. And as they're going, they somehow Willow is still on the sled and Madmartigan falls off the sled, and Willow with the baby on the sled, crash into a home in the village and end up going into the house. Well, they look out the window and Madmartigan's still rolling down the hill, and he's basically in a gigantic snowball, which then crashes into the house. So they know the soldiers are coming at this point because Rizal as a crow starts letting them know, hey, they're coming. So they manage to find a place in the village that has a hidden floor, a hidden door in the floor, and they go down into a basement where they run into Eric and what's left of his soldiers as they were defeated by Bavmorda. Sorsha ends up coming into the house, finding the trap door, and as she descends down the stairs, Madmartigan grabs her and puts a knife to her throat. Throughout this, they're having discussions about Tir Asleen, and Eric asks why Madmartigan is helping Willow, because Madmartigan serves no one. And Madmartigan says, well, I serve the Nelwyn, Eric, and I think he's finally making a stand and choosing to fight for good. And Eric wishes them luck, but says, there's no point. Even if you could get there, her soldiers are everywhere, and they're going to destroy you. Madmartigan asks Eric to come with them, and he decides not to. And through a series of battles, he ends up taking Sorsha with them. Willow and the baby are on one horse, and Sorsha and Madmartigan are on the other, and they start riding off toward Tir Asleen. Sorsha, at this point, is starting to feel very confused and conflicted, and is trying to understand why Madmartigan was saying all of those things to her in the tent, right? I mean, he was saying poetry, he couldn't live without her, so he said he wasn't sure, and she said, so you were lying to me? And he said, no, I wasn't exactly lying, but it just went away. And she says, I'm your sun and your stars, and it went away. So she manages to get free of him and jump off the horse, and initially he's chasing her, but Willow's like, come on, we need to get to Tir Asleen before they catch up with us. And so he lets her go, but they both look back at one another for a moment, and then she continues running back to Kale and the soldiers. Madmartigan and Willow continue, and they arrive at Tir Asleen. Now, in the hero's journey, we have the stage of the ordeal. I believe in this movie we have 2 ordeals that happen, and I believe this is the first of the 2 ordeals, the standoff at Tir Asleen. So when they arrive at Tir Asleen, again, this is where Shalindria told them to go, or they would be safe, and the baby would be safe. They show up, and all of the people are frozen in stone, and they find trolls, or evidence that there are trolls there. They don't have much time to look around, however, because just about as soon as they get there, we can hear the soldiers approaching. So Madmartigan, quick thinking, closed the gates, or the entrance to the castle, and finds wood to put into the door so they can't get in, and to buy them time while the soldiers cut down a tree to create a battering ram. So they explore, and Madmartigan finds an armory filled with different weapons, and so he starts setting booby traps up all around the castle, while Willow is just trying to figure out how to keep this baby safe. He finds a place to put the baby. When they first get to the castle, Willow tries to change Rizal back into human form, and instead turns her into a goat. And then we see that there's trolls. Rizal tells Willow to use the wand on this troll, and he does. And the troll, it kind of almost melts and turns into this pulsating thing, and it's gooey and gross, and Willow kicks it into the moat, and then by the time Kale and his men bash through the door and come through, it has morphed into a giant 2-headed dragon. And of course, Madmartigan's living his best life because he's going around sword fighting, and Sorsha's watching him, again in confusion, not sure how she feels. And then finally at one point he falls on the ground and she points her sword at him, and then she puts down her sword, grabs him, and they kiss. And then after that, she's now on their side. Interesting fact, this is kind of a side note, but that scene is in real life. I don't know if you know this or not, but Val Kilmer and Joanne Whalley met on this film set and actually fell in love and got married.
And that scene where she kisses him, he's supposed to say a line of dialogue, and every time they did that scene, he forgot his line, so they never got it, which I thought was really sweet and touching. Right as the intense battle is getting perhaps too much for Madmartigan, Eric does show up with his soldiers. Cale finds Willow with Elora Danan, and as the fighting ensues, we see Cale with Elora Danan leaving the castle. Then we see Willow come out of a room with the sword, and he's covered in blood, and immediately Madmartigan and Sorsha run to him. And again, I think this is why this is the first ordeal, because this is a major blow to Willow. He actually finally stands up and is able to physically fight, and he fails. And Cale gets the baby, and then they show Cale going to Bavmorda's fortress and presenting the baby to her, which, of course, she's thrilled, but then she asks, "Where's Sorsha?" And he said, "Sorsha has betrayed you, my queen." The second ordeal is when Willow and company have to face Queen Bavmorda. They end up leaving Tir Asleen and go to Bavmorda's fortress. Not until nightfall that Bavmorda makes an appearance. She's at the very top of the battlements of the castle, and she just starts laughing this crazy maniacal laugh, and that's how everyone knows that she's there. And they're asking her to give them back the baby. At some point, the goat Rizal asks Willow to come into a tent, and she teaches him a protective spell to protect them. And while that happens, Bavmorda decides to turn everyone into pigs. But because Willow's doing the spell, he and Rizal are protected. She says, "Please, let's try the transformation spell again." And Willow goes again. So as Willow is using this spell, Rizal goes from a goat to an ostrich to a turtle to a tiger, and then eventually she becomes her human self. And she's able to take the wand, and she's able to reverse the spell, or the curse, if you will, of everyone turning into pigs, and everyone's then protected. So now they're trying to put a game plan together to be able to get into this castle. So they decide that they're going to hide everyone in the camp, and only Rizal and Willow approach, and that they will destroy them if the baby is not returned. In the meantime, Queen Bavmorda has started this ritual. She has the baby bound in these red garments with these black belts type things tied on her. She cuts off a lock of her hair, puts it in what I assume would be blood, and is just doing crazy stuff. I don't know. So finally they lower down the drawbridge, and a couple of, soldiers come out. And then once they get within a certain distance, he beats on a drum, and all of the hidden soldiers come out of the ground and go for the castle. And before it can close, Sorsha, Rizal, and Willow go into the castle, and Madmartigan stays and fights Cale. Eventually, during the battle with Cale, Madmartigan's friend Eric is killed by Cale, and Madmartigan then fights and kills Cale. Willow, Sorsha, and Rizal are ascending the stairs to the tower, where they can hear Bavmorda doing horrible things to the child, and Rizal gives him an out. She says, "Willow, you don't have to go." They go into the room, and Sorsha enters, and I suppose maybe she thought, since she was her daughter, she could convince her maybe to stop. But as soon as she gets the courage to speak to her mother, she immediately starts stammering over her words, and Bavmorda says, "I must despise you now," because she betrayed her. And in fact, in the scene with the pigs, she looks at Sorsha. She had not turned her into a pig yet, just everybody else. And then Sorsha says, "Mother, no." And then Bavmorda is crying. And then she turns her into a pig. And then she goes from feeling conflicted to laughing and enjoying inflicting pain on her. When she tells Sorsha she must despise her, and Sorsha starts walking toward Bavmorda, she uses her powers to lift her, and she nearly shoves her into a wall of spikes. And then Rizal, with her wand, stops her in midair. And Bavmorda drops her to the floor and she passes out. And so there's this battle that ensues with Rizal and Bavmorda, and they keep fighting each other. Eventually, they both have a grip on the wand, and sparks are flying everywhere, spells are being cast everywhere. And then finally, Rizal is knocked out. And so now it's left to Willow to face Bavmorda. And during the battle between Rizal and Bavmorda, Willow was able to grab Elora Danan, and they were hiding. And Bavmorda was able to figure out where they were and tells Willow to put her back on the table so she can complete the ritual to send Elora Danan's soul to a dark realm where she can never escape. And so Willow actually knows some sleight of hand magic, right? It's not the real magic like, a sorcerer would use, but it's sleight of hand magic. He tells Bavmorda he's this great sorcerer, and she just sort of laughs at him, and he threw an acorn at her, and she grabs it, and she starts turning into stone. And at first, Willow thought that he won. He's like, wow, how, you can just tell. He's like, wow, I can't believe that worked. And Bavmorda seems worried at first, but then she's able to reverse it. And she says, is that the extent of your powers, little one? And then he tells her that he's going to send Elora Danan into a realm where evil cannot touch her. And Bavmorda says there's no such place. And he's holding this bundle, and then he says some words, and he shakes out the bundle, and the baby isn't there. And of course, Bavmorda is shocked. She's like, that's impossible. And then she has Shalindria's wand. She points it backward and accidentally touches the blood and hair that she was using to make this spell, right? And so as she goes to point it at Willow, lightning strikes it. And I guess it completed the ritual, and instead of it sending Elora Danan to this horrible realm, she gets put there. That's what we assume happens, right? And so Bavmorda is defeated, and Willow is triumphant. He finally was able to face her, and he faced her using his own abilities, right? He's not a great sorcerer yet, even though he is learning, but he used his own knowledge of sleight of hand and being able to trick her, right? And then she's destroyed. Now we face the final phases where Willow has completed his mission, and he will be heading home. So Sorsha and Madmartigan go to Tir Asleen, the curse there is lifted, and they are going to raise Elora Danan. And Rizal gifts Willow with a book of magic so that he can continue his studies to becoming a great sorcerer. And he leaves them all behind, and he travels back home, where he is welcomed with open arms by both the village and his wife. And when he gets home, he turns a rock into a bird, just like the High Aldwin did near the beginning of the movie. And he is transformed, and he is able to come back with a new perspective and with new knowledge, and is able to show them that he is in fact a great sorcerer. Okay, everyone, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you like Willow, if you hate Willow, let's have a respectful discussion down in the comments. I would love to hear what you think, and I look forward to making more videos. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you, and I just want to say that you are stronger than you know. You have a voice. You have opinions. You should share them, and God bless. Have a great day.
Gentlemen? Not a woman! Meet Lug. Ah!